So you need flour and water and a jar, and that's about it. So this is my water. This is just tap water. It's not even filtered. You can use filtered, of course. Sometimes I put those charcoal bamboo filters in my water, but a lot of the time I just use tap water. So, oh, size of the jar. A Bonne Maman jar is perfect. Use a jar that can fit a couple of cups or a cup and a half. This is less than 2 cups. And a wide mouth jar is nice. So short and kind of wide mouth is ideal because then you can easily scoop it out. If you use a jar like, well, I don't have one here because I don't like them. If you use a jar with a narrow neck, it's really hard to feed and to scoop. So wide mouth jar, or it is Christmas. You could treat yourself to one of these Le Parfait jars. I love Le Parfait, but they're not necessary. Any jar will do, but I really like the straight sides, and it's a really wide mouth and it's easy to scoop out. So yeah, thanks for asking about the jar. So about the jar, while I'm talking about the jar, it just has to be clean. You don't have to sterilize it. If you do sterilize it, the bacteria in the air will just recolonize it immediately. So you don't have to sterilize it. Bad bacteria aren't going to survive in your starter. The good bacteria will crowd them out and kill them off if any bad bacteria get in there. So wash it with clean, soapy, warm water, and that's just fine. Same with your utensil, your tool, fancy sourdough tool, your fork. Clean, soapy, doesn't have to be sterile. Okay, so the water. If you have chlorine in your water, you'll be able to smell it. And we don't. Yeah, ours is fine. If you do have a lot of chlorine in your water, I don't have this problem, but I've read about it. You can pour water in, use a bowl because it has a wide surface. And after, I don't know, a day, probably less than a day, the chlorine will evaporate. So that's why you want to use a wider surface. So that's if you have chlorine, because chlorine can kill the kill the good bacteria. Well, all the bacteria. Kill the bad bacteria, but also the good bacteria and yeast that you need to make your starter. I used to warm up my water to feed my starter, and you can do that. You'd want it maybe 80, 85 degrees, not as warm as when you use baker's yeast. That's about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius. So I used to warm it up, but it's another step and you really don't need to. I did that for years, and then one day I was visiting my daughter. She was away at university, and she fed her starter just with tap water, lukewarm, that had been sitting on the counter. And I said, "Oh, you don't warm it up?" And she said, "No." So I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to do that because it saves time. So room temperature water is fine. So that's the water. The flour. Okay, this is a combination of white flour and whole wheat flour. My starter really likes rye flour. Eleanor, that's my starter, she goes crazy for rye flour. So sometimes I'll have half white, half rye in here, or half white, half whole wheat, which is what is in now, half white, half spelt. Or, you know, early on in the pandemic, I would just feed whatever I could get because it was hard to find flour. So some days Eleanor was just getting whole wheat, all whole wheat, because that seemed to be easier to find than all purpose. This is organic, but it doesn't have to be organic. Any flour is fine. I prefer organic. I also have a grain mill, and I don't have it out here to show you, but sometimes I grind up my own wheat berries, and that flour is delicious. And my starter goes wild. So I have, let's see, emmer wheat. That's an ancient wheat. It's delicious. Farro, it's called farro also. So there's farro, there's rye wheat berries. What else? Hard wheat berries. They kind of look like rice a little bit, and you can buy them in bulk at a lot of stores and grind that up if you really get into this. So, okay, somebody just asked about protein flour. So you can use whatever you asked, garbanzo flour. So I haven't done that, but I can't imagine it won't work. But there's no gluten. So like you can't keep food from fermenting. You should be able to make a starter with those types of flours, although I haven't tried it. I have used buckwheat flour for a gluten-free starter, but I haven't made the bread. So I would experiment. But I'm going to show you how to do it with wheat flour. So I hope in the Evite or Eventbrite stuff I sent out, I had a list of the ingredients you needed, the materials needed for this glass, flour, water, and a jar basically. And I asked you to mix the flours up in a jar before class. And the reason I do that is because I only have to measure out one type of flour every time I feed my starter instead of measuring out two, which is a small thing, but it does speed things up. So that's why I have it combined here in my jar. This was a secondhand Le Parfait jar. Every once in a while, I score these at the thrift store. And I always think, oh no, something terrible must have happened to the owner who would get rid of a Le Parfait jar. So now I will make the starter. If you don't have a scale, oh good, you can see my scale. Oh, there. All right, if you don't have a scale, you're going to use a scant 1/4 cup water and about 1/2 cup of flour. If you do have a scale, you'll use 50 grams of each, or water is 50 mils or 50 grams. If you are gonna do a lot of sourdough, I really recommend getting a scale. And I don't like to tell people to buy a lot of stuff, but it really does make it easier. I made bread recently, and let's see, my bread calls for 1,000 cups of flour, and I didn't have a scale with me. I was staying at a friend's house while she was away, house sitting, because her kitchen is like stunning. Anyway, so I didn't have a scale over there, and I was measuring out the flour, and I don't know how many cups it was, 7 or 8 cups, and I lost track. And I could tell as soon as I added the water to the flour and the starter that I had done something terribly wrong. So then I had to adjust it until, it felt right, because I've made a lot of sourdough, so I can just tell now, okay, that feels right now. But if you have a scale, you just dump everything in, and it's so easy. So, but when you're just starting, I wouldn't get one if you're just starting. And also on my blog, I have the measurements if you don't have a scale, so you can always follow those. All right, so I'm going to tear out my jar. So it says 0. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that, Cecilia? Oh, you can. Wow. All right, I have a tiny screen, so all right, so I'm going to put in 50 grams of flour, which is about 1/2 cup. So I'm going to put that in my jar. Uh, 54. It's okay. It's not. I'm a little anal about that, but it's fine if it's not. If it's more than 50 grams. Oops, sorry. I keep making the table shake. All right, there's my flour, and now my water. So adding 50 grams. So I get to 100. Oh, 105. Oh, that's okay. Now, I'm putting 5 more grams of flour. You don't have to do that. Okay, there we go. 110. So this is a tiny, tiny bit bigger. It doesn't matter. I'm going to stir that up. And if you have a rubber spatula, that's nice to clean the sides of the jar and the fork, but it's not necessary. Oh, Veronique combined white and whole wheat. So I have, that's why, so I have the 2 types of flour in here, and I put in 50 grams or half cup. So if you don't have the flours combined, do about a 1/4 cup of each, or 25 grams of each. And don't worry about it being off by a little bit, it's okay. So I just stir that up. You can see it's really thick. It's not going anywhere. Oh. Okay. Now, you can put a cloth over that, like the kombucha behind me has a cloth on it with a rubber band. You can do that, or you can just put the lid on and set it aside. If you're starting a brand new starter, you might want the cloth on instead to try and attract more bacteria. But either way, it should work. But just make sure that if you do the cloth, it's on there really securely. So use a rubber band or string, because once it starts to smell vinegary, it will attract fruit flies if it gets really vinegary, and you don't want them getting in there. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside, and then every day I'm going to stir it a couple of times, a few times, just when I think of it. I'm going to stir it up. And so there's bacteria. I didn't stir this one up very well. There's some flour stuck there on the bottom. That's okay. Anyway, so the flours have bacteria and yeast in them, and there's bacteria and yeast in the air, and it's on your hands. And when you add the water, you kind of revive the bacteria. And ooh, this is, this makes a good rubber spatula, just a clean finger. So they kind of come back to life, and they start to eat the carbohydrates in the flour, and then they emit gases and acids, and they transform it. But it's going to take a little while. So, whoops, stir it every day. After about, depends on your kitchen, after maybe 3 days, maybe 5 days, or if you live in a really humid climate, it might be just 1 day. You'll start to see some bubbles, and people want to feed it when they see a few bubbles, or even if they see quite a few bubbles, but you also want it to smell, and it might not smell great. It might smell, well, probably won't smell great. It'll probably smell pretty bad. So it might smell like dirty socks or bad cheese, might smell really vinegary. And a lot of people, they stop at that point because they think, oh, this smells really nasty, I've done something wrong. But actually that's a sign that it's fine. At that point, when you see some bubbles and it's smelly, that's when you want to feed it. And so, wipe my finger here. Where did I, okay, here we go. Okay, so here's one. All right, this is what I just made. Not much happening there, and it smells like flour, just smells like flour, no smell to it. Here is one that has, you might not even see this many bubbles, but it has some bubbles in it that you can see. And it smells, it's risen, I don't know if you can tell, it's risen a little bit. And it's smoother now. It becomes more elastic. So when you smell it, when it's smelly and you see the bubbles, that's when you feed it. And now this is when people get confused and run into trouble. So people, I think the biggest problem is they feed it too soon. They see some bubbles and they feed it, and they take out a lot of the bacteria and yeast that are just developing in there. And then they feed it, and then nothing happens because they've taken out bacteria and yeast that were just getting started. So this is a new little trick that I've just started telling people, and I haven't written this anywhere on my blog. When you feed it, keep this one. Set it aside, don't put it in the refrigerator, just keep it on the counter. So you're going to take a spoonful out and you're going to feed it, and I'll show you how. And then if it turns out you have fed it too soon, you still have this jar that you've left out. And so if the new one doesn't bubble, this one probably will, like the next day. Is that confusing, Cecilia, what I've just said?
Not to me. But if anybody has a question, they can write it on the chat, and then Anne-Marie can repeat it again later.
Okay, so the jar, you're going to store it at room temperature on the counter. Don't put it in the refrigerator. You can put the discard in there, and I'll get to that. Okay, so your starter is born. Yeah, okay, Malu, this is right now you have one starter. Okay, one jar. I have multiple jars here. This is the starter we just made. I just made. Okay, now we've gone through a sourdough time machine. This is the same one. So this is the starter, and it smells and it's bubbly. I'm gonna feed it. So I'll show you how to feed it. Oh, okay. Darn it. I've run out of jars. I've run out of Bun Mama jars. I need one more Bun Mama jar. I want to confuse people. Just a minute. I'm sorry. Okay, there's the starter. I'm going to put 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water in this jar. I now have 2 jars. And this is where people get really confused. So I'm going to tear it out. I'm going to add 50 grams of water, or a scant quarter cup. Yeah, the very first time I taught this in person, I was talking away, blah, 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 and telling everybody what to do. And I looked up at the class of the group, and they were all like this. And someone said, it sounds like who's on first? You've got this jar, and you're putting that jar over here. All right, 50 grams of flour. Can't believe I'm low on Bun Mama jars. Well, they don't pay me to say that. I just love Bun Mama jars. Okay, 100 grams.
Sorry, should this happen after 3 days? So what you are doing now is to feed it, but that's after 3 days.
Probably about 3 days. Okay. It might be 2 days. It might be 5 days.
Okay.
So yeah, but you wait.
Yeah. Thank you.
And this is where people have the most trouble, is time, like figuring out if it's time to feed the starter or not. That's where people run into trouble. I get questions about that more than just about everything else about sourdough. Okay, so I'm stirring that up. Whoops. And now I'm going to add, I'm gonna stir this down a little bit and take out a heaping. Oh, and you'll see how it has changed. Like there's some gluten forming in there. It's all stringy. Whereas when I first made it with just the flour and water, it was just a clumpy mess. All right, so I'm going to take out a spoonful, like a tablespoon. That's probably more than a tablespoon. And I'm going to add that to my jar. It's usually about 17 grams. 19, I have 19. I'm pretty good at eyeballing. I got overly excited over these things. Okay, then stir that up. All right, and there is my fed starter. Now, this is the starter. I just fed it. This is the starter that I just made. Let's pretend. So I now have 2 jars. If I did feed it too early and this doesn't bubble up, you still have this one. If this doesn't bubble up, that means you fed it too soon, but it's okay because you still have this one. So usually if you wait 1 or 2 days longer, this will bubble up. So I've been able to, I'm like the sourdough midwife. I've been able, or doula or something. Several people have emailed me the same thing. Like I fed it and nothing happened and I killed it. And I said, no, you just fed it too soon. So give it a couple of more days and just wait. It's really hard. It's really hard to wait. Anyway, so if this doesn't bubble up, this one will. And then when it bubbles up, you feed it again. Now that's if this one doesn't bubble up. I can talk about flour and water for a really long time. This one likely will bubble up, probably be okay. So then the same time tomorrow, you feed it again. So you remove a spoonful and then you add fresh flour and water. And then you do that every day at about the same time. And after, I mean, it depends on your kitchen. It depends on the heat and your environment, how much bacteria and yeast are in the air. Let's say after about 5 days, a week, it should be ready to bake with. Yeah, every day, 50 grams of each. 50 grams water, 50 grams flour. It's going to rise up and fall back down over, let's see, mine takes about, if I feed it at night, before bed, say 9 o'clock at night, and I get up at 6 in the morning, overnight, it will have risen up, and you can see from the jar, the evidence that it rose up, and it will have just started to fall back down. So it takes a long time. And this is what it looks like mature. This is Eleanor. I couldn't find her outfit. I sewed her an outfit. And I don't know where it is. Oh wait, someone just asked a question. No, you don't need okay, you need a bigger jar for the discard. Well, let me show you first though. So this is what a mature starter looks like. Lots of bubbles. So this is the one I just made. What? And this is the one all fed. So it's, well, it hasn't quite doubled in size. You probably can't see from the camera, but it's doming. So it still has some way to go to rise up. But this is how it will look when it's mature. It smells, oh, it smells so good. kind of fruity and really not very sour, yeasty. All right, so someone asked about the bigger jar. Well, I have a lot of jars sitting here. So every day, when you remove that spoonful, you're gonna have all this extra starter. So what I do is I store that in my big jar of discard. This is not bubbly at all because I've been keeping this in the fridge. This jar I've had going for months. I'll put the stuff that's left over, the stuff that I don't feed, which is the majority of the starter. I put that in here and then I put that in the fridge. And then I'll take some out to make things like pancakes or crackers. This is some cracker dough I made. I timed myself before class. I made it and it took 7 minutes to make this cracker dough. Then you roll it out and you bake it, and they're really, really good crackers. And that recipe is on my blog. So this is the discard where you put all the extra starter. Does that? Okay, now the discard will stay good for a long time. Like I said, I've had this in the fridge for months, but I keep recycling it. So I take, like today I took 2/3 of a cup out for my crackers, and then I'll add one of these jars of starter to it, and then I stir it up. So it's constantly getting mixed up. Okay, so the terminology is a little bit confusing. Someone asked about the discard. So the discard is the extra stuff left over from feeding. So this is the one I fed. This is the one, the brand new starter. It's not starter yet. It's just starting to come to light. And I took a spoonful out and I put it in here. Okay, so this, because I know this is going to come to life, I don't need this now. I'm going to put that in my discard jar. And this is what I keep in the refrigerator. Do not keep your starter in the refrigerator until it's mature like this. Then if you want to break, you can put it in the refrigerator. If you're tired of feeding it every day, you can do that. Okay, I didn't see, the questions are cut off because I'm on my iPhone, so I just see the beginning. I saw somebody asking about the discard, if you have to bring it to room temperature. I'm assuming it was if you have to bring it to room temperature before you bake. And I don't. I just made my dough, pull it right out of the fridge, and I make it. And I have a bunch of cakes on my blog. Well, maybe I only have 3. I've been working on a bunch of them. I think there are 3 on my blog that call for discard. And I use that cold right out of the refrigerator. The original recipe that I based that on called for cold water. So I like to keep the starter cold. Let's see. So maybe I should recap. All right, so if you've made your starter today, along with me, you're going to stir that up a few times a day. And when you see bubbles and it smells, you're going to feed it. You're going to remove a spoonful and feed that fresh flour and water. The excess, you're going to put aside. That's the sourdough discard. And you're going to feed it every day. And you're going to add to your discard jar. If you want to break, you can put the mature starter in the fridge, but only when it's mature. The discard, you store it in the fridge. Store it in the fridge. The starter, you store it on the counter. Let's see. Maybe I should start answering questions, Cecilia, because I saw a bunch going by and I didn't. What do you think?
Yeah, you are answering questions. People are asking the information that you just told us. People are asking about it.
Okay.
Just continue. Like for example, how long can it stay in the fridge if you want to break for your starter?
Oh, right. Thank you. I keep mine in there for a week. I kept it longer for like 10 days. People have told me they've kept it in longer than that. I'm a little overly protective of my starter. She turned 7 on February 10th. So in a couple of months, she turned 7. But you can probably keep it in there longer. You can also store it in the freezer. So if you're going away for a long time, you just need a tiny, like a tiny jar full. Take the green onion out of it, but that size, that's all you need. That's a couple of ounces. It's tiny little jar. You can put that in the freezer, and I've done that a couple of times just to test it, to make sure it works. Bring it to room temperature, and then add it to fresh flour and water. Oh, I saw a question about reviving the discard. I saw that earlier. Yes, you can do that. So I got stuck in Canada at the beginning of COVID. I went up there to see my mom, and I couldn't get back. And I was there for almost 4 months. And when I got back, my discard looked pretty bad. I don't know if my daughter had fed it for at least a couple of months. It had just sat there in the fridge and it didn't look good. There was this rubbery disc across the top. Now it wasn't black. There wasn't black stuff on the top, or mold or pink or orange or anything like that. Gray liquid across the top is okay. That's called hooch. Just pour that off. But yeah, if you need to revive your discard, you can do that. Just take a spoonful out and feed it fresh flour and water. My other daughter has accidentally eaten her her entire starter before. If you do that by accident, if you put say I put this whole jar in a recipe and it's all I had of my starter, I don't have to start over. If I have discard, I can just feed a spoonful of that. And I saw a couple of questions fly by. Cecilia?
Once the original starter, once it's bubbling, can you use that right away? Or you have to feed it every day?
You have to feed it every day. So this would be great to use now in a recipe. So if I wanted to start bread or make pizza, or I don't know, sticky buns. That one's not on my blog, but the sticky buns are in my cookbook. It's coming out in April. Now would be a perfect time to start this. Or sorry, to start a recipe when it's all bubbly. The thing is, if I don't get to it, what time is it? Okay, it's like 1:30. If I wait to start something tonight, well, that might still be okay, but a lot of the bubbles are going to be gone. They're going to start to go away, because I fed this really early this morning at about, I don't know, 5 a.m. So you want to do it when there are lots of bubbles. So usually about, I don't know, 12 hours after you feed it, it'll be at its peak, or 8. It depends on your kitchen. Take lots of notes when you do this. So I made pita bread on the weekend with baker's yeast, just, the dry active yeast. Oh my God, it was so easy. And I used to always use baker's yeast or active dry yeast before I started baking with sourdough. And it just works. This is more, you kind of have to know how it behaves. You have to pay attention. You have to use your senses when you're baking with sourdough. But it tastes so good, and it's so good for you, and it's so fun. I forget what the question was now.
Lisa Dimete is asking, can you use the discard as to make bread, or only the active starter?
Yeah, only the active starter. Now, because the discard, so you can see, so there's no bubble. There are no bubbles in it. It's just totally flat. There's nothing. Whereas this is super bubbly. This is filled with yeast, which is going to make your bread rise. But you can put this in a recipe. So Charlotte, my daughter, she made bread this week with active dry yeast. And I didn't have a recipe on my blog for that. And I wanted to put one up because not everybody is going to bake sourdough. And so I wrote that post up. That recipe you could add some discard to. You can convert a lot of recipes, and you can add starter to them. So the conversion is on my blog. What is it? So let's say you just wanted to add sourdough flavor to a recipe, but not rely on it to make the bread rise, then you can add some discard. This is not going to make the bread rise, just you would still have to use the active dry yeast. So if I wanted to add a cup of this, I would take out, if I add a cup of this to a recipe, I would take out something like a cup of flour and a half a cup of water. I have to look it up, even though I wrote that myself and I say it all the time. I can't think of the conversion off the top of my head. But no, you don't use this for the bread because it's just not lively enough. Your dough will be a flat puddle. It won't develop the air bubbles and it won't rise up. So you have to use the bubbly stuff. Oh, I did see a question. Someone said, how much do you remove? You remove about, it works out to about 80%. So if you want to make a bigger starter, like say you did 100 grams of each, then you'd feed about 2 tablespoons you'd take about 2 tablespoons out of your starter and you would feed it if you want to make 100 grams of each. So, but for this size, I did 50 and 50. I fed a tablespoon. I would feed a tablespoon and then add 50 grams of each. I hope I'm making sense. So hard because I can't see people. I only see a handful of people. I can't see like the confused looks or the looks of yes, I understand.
So I see a bunch of questions about when you want to make your starter have a break and you put it in the fridge, how do you revive it again? And how long can you put your starter in the fridge?
Okay, so I would keep it in there for about a week or 10 days. Take it out, and then just feed it. It's gonna be hungry after it's been in the fridge. So then you would just start feeding again daily, like you were before you put it in there. But you have to wait until you have a mature starter. Don't put the jar you mixed up today into the refrigerator because nothing's gonna happen. It might just get moldy because the bacteria and yeast aren't going to develop in there. It's too cold. I mean, yeah. So.
How do we know when the starter is not good anymore?
Oh, well, it could get mold and you'll recognize it because mold, it looks like mold you'd see on bread. It's black or green or white and furry and raised. So if you get a lot of mold on it, start over. I've had mold maybe once or twice, and I've had my starter for almost 7 years. I've had mold on the jar, right on the rim, once, maybe twice. I just removed a scoop of the starter, and then I fed it in a new clean jar. If you're not comfortable with that, start over. If you see orange or pink, don't try to save it. Start over because that's not good. Yeah, there are starters. There's a sourdough starter museum in Belgium. I think it's in Belgium, and they have some starters there that are 120 years old. So it can live forever. Oh, and King Arthur, they sell a sourdough starter that's older than the United States. It dates back to maybe the 1750s, something like that. So yeah, they can live for a really long time.
I saw somebody's asking if they see a gray liquid on the top. Can they still use the starter?
Yep, that's fine. That's called hooch. That develops on my starter, my discard in the fridge often. Oh, so I usually pour it off. You can stir it in. My daughter in Canada, she stirs it into her starter. Another thing you can try, I haven't tried this, but when I get hooch from now, I'm going to save it in a separate jar and use that to make my cultured cashew cheese. I use kimchi for that, or preserved lemons with a bit of homemade vinegar. But the gray stuff from the top of the discard or the starter, that will ferment stuff too. So that's another experiment I want to try. So anyway, short answer, pour it off or stir it in. It's fine. That happens. And then there's also this sourdough starter test, the float test you can do. It's not 100% foolproof, though. It doesn't always work. But you can take a spoonful of starter and you can put it in a cup of warm water. And if it floats, then it's ready to make bread. It's lively enough. If it sinks, it might not be ready. So I can do it right now. I will do the float test and show you. Just a minute. Sorry, I have to get warm water. Okay, have some warm water. I'll see if my starter floats. I don't know if it's warm enough. So here it is. It's like the test for whether a woman was a witch in the Middle Ages. If she floats, she's a witch. So if it floats, it's ready to bake bread. And then you bake it in the oven instead of burning it at stake. Oh no, it sank. It doesn't work. I know that this is really good. My water might not be warm enough. All right. Well, sorry, that wasn't very helpful. Yeah, if a witch sank and drowned, or if a woman sank and drowned, then she wasn't a witch, but she was dead. So.
Anne-Marie, after we make our starter, how much starter do we need to use for a loaf of bread?
Okay, now to make the bread, and I have an online sourdough bread class coming up in January. Those ones aren't free though. It's over 3 days we meet on Zoom. Okay, to make the bread, so let's say I want to make bread tonight. I will make what's called a leaven or levain if you're French. That is a giant starter, so it's just a bigger starter. But you have to have active starter to make it. So you have to have it on hand to make it. So in the background, I have my little starter going. And then when I want to make the bread or, whatever, sticky buns, I take a little bit out of this and make my big starter or levain. You only need, for my sourdough bread, for 2 loaves, you need 35 grams of this. And that's it. If you're going to make 4 loaves, you need 70 grams. So I usually make 2 loaves, make it worth my while. Occasionally I'll make 1. Sometimes I make 3. So you don't need that much. Then you make a giant starter, and then you put that whole thing in the bread. So that's why you want to make sure you don't eat the whole thing. When you have this little one going in the background, then you can just, pull a little bit out whenever you want to start something. So like for the bread, if I was going to make bread tonight I would make my leaven, and I would soak my 1,000 grams of flour I do 750 grams of warm water, or 775. Then in the morning, I combine my grains, soap grains, and my leaven, And I mix that all up, and then I add salt. Then you do the bulk fermentation. That's the dough ferments for 4 to 5 hours, and you do these stretches and folds during that time. Then you form the loaves, and I do an overnight proof in the refrigerator, and then the morning of the next day, I bake it. So if I were to start the bread tonight, Sunday, I would work on the dough Monday and bake it Tuesday. You don't have to do an overnight proof though. You could, if I made the dough tomorrow, I could bake it tomorrow afternoon, late in the afternoon. But I find an overnight proof makes it rise up a lot, makes a huge difference. And you get a little break too. And you're not, when you proof at room temperature, you have to really pay attention. You don't want it to overproof. And in the refrigerator, it's so slow in there, it proofs slowly. You don't have to worry about that so much. Do you do a cold proof? Oh, you're on mute.
Repeat your question, Emma?
Do you do cold proof, Cecilia, when you make the bread?
No.
No. You bake it the same day?
Yes.
Yeah, you can do it either way.
For the next 10 minutes before we end this class, can you do a quick recap, Anne-Marie?
Oh, sure. Okay. So, and then once you've fed it once or twice, it's really easy. It's easy when you know how. Oh, focaccia is so good. Yeah, I've been making that a lot lately. All right, so we have the starter you just made, your brand new starter. And then you're going to stir it every day, a few times a day, until it starts to bubble and smell. You want it to bubble and you want it to smell, and it's probably not going to smell good. You may think that you've done something wrong, and it's fine. Might smell like smelly socks or stinky cheese or very vinegary. Okay, then, oh, wait, I've had too many jars. When it starts to bubble, take out a spoonful, a tablespoon. You can put that in a clean jar and then add another 50 grams flour, 50 grams water, stir it up. Once you start feeding it, you have to feed it every day. Do it at the same time of day. Ideally, it's okay if you don't, but when you're first starting, try to stick to feeding it in 24-hour intervals. Also, once you start feeding it, you don't have to stir it anymore. That's just when you're trying to coax it to life. All right, you feed it every day like that. Then once it gets really bubbly, I stirred this down and removed some of the bubbles. And when it's really bubbly and it's rising and falling, it will about double in size. And then it will fall back down to where it was. It'll do that over, I don't know, 8 hours. Depends on how hot your kitchen is. If your kitchen's really hot, it's going to go fast. If it's cold, it'll go really slowly. When it's doing that every day, and it smells fruity and maybe kind of sour and yeasty, then it's ready to bake the bread. I use a combination of white flour and whole wheat flour, or white flour and rye flour. Starter really likes rye flour. And if you don't have a scale, do 0.5 gram of flour. So this is why I have it mixed in a jar, because it's easy to measure out 1/2 cup, because I use both types. So 0.5 cup total flour, and the scant 1/4 cup water. And store your discard in the fridge. This is the extra starter. So you're going to take out a spoonful. You're going to have a bunch of starter left over. You put it in your discard jar. Use that for crackers, pancakes, waffles, chocolate cake, all sorts of things. Pizza. What are those things? Pretzels. and store your starter at room temperature. When you want to break, after it's mature, not before, put it in the refrigerator for a week at a time. Take it out, feed it. If you don't feel like baking, put it back in the refrigerator. I keep mine on the counter and I feed it every day. Is that, did I cover, you think I covered it all?
Yes. Yeah. So
you remove a full, yeah, take every day, you're going to feed a spoonful. So this might confuse you. Dump everything except a spoonful from the jar into your discard jar. If that, I don't know if that's less confusing or more confusing, but leave a spoonful, everything else in here, and feed it. Okay, that's more clear, Tessa. Okay.
And do you want to talk about your classroom sourdough bread class that you're offering again, just in case anybody is interested making go in the details how to make sourdough bread?
Yeah, I mentioned that the spoonful is about 17 grams. It's a tablespoon, 17 grams approximately. Yeah, so I have a sourdough bread class. I mentioned that. It's all on Zoom. I used to do these in person, but I haven't done any in person since, I think, February last year. I did one right before I left for Canada for my trip, my very long trip. So yeah, we'll meet online. You'll have your starter. So, get your starter going. But it's not a free class. It's $100. Only 6 students per class. I have 2 scheduled. And we'll meet Friday night. I forget what the schedule says. I think 8 p.m. And we'll make our leaven and we'll soak the flour and the water. In the morning, we meet again on Zoom. We'll make our dough. And then I'll explain the bulk fermentation. And that's like 4 or 5 hours. So we'll go offline for a few hours and then we meet again. And we do shaping the dough. And then we meet the next morning and we bake the bread. So it's a weekend commitment, but I didn't have anyone show me how to make sourdough bread, and it makes a huge difference if someone shows you. So, and that's on my blog, zerowastechef.com. You'll see at the top left workshops across unless you're on your phone, then you have to go to the menu. So, and they're fun. They're small classes. So.
Yeah, so the students can interact with you directly and ask questions.
Yeah, because it's only 6 people. Mm-hmm. Right. On here, it's
Here it's we had almost 80 people that with different questions that you have. And we're sorry if we cannot answer some of your questions because there's so many questions in the chat room.
Are there some more?
Some of them is just it's the same question that
and if you want, go to my blog and you can watch a recording of a class just like this, and then you can jump around. You can, so like if you're if you are confused about the feeding, you just go to that section, and so it's. Go to my homepage and then scroll down a little bit and look for the post on this class. It's something like a sourdough starter workshop and a recording of a previous class. And then you can find out stuff there. So, yeah, there's, like I said, I can talk about flour and water. It's amazing. How can flour and water be this complicated? And when I pull the bread out, I'm just amazed. Flour, water, and salt makes the most amazing bread. That's all you need. So, well, I can answer one more question. It's 1:57.
Do you need to put a closed lid on the jar, on your starter, or need to be?
Yeah. I would close it tightly because you don't want to attract fruit flies, and carbon dioxide and stuff is building up in there. But you're going to open it every day, so it's not going to explode. We've had, my daughter has had kombucha bottles explode. Never had a starter jar. I mean, imagine it can happen, but yeah, just screw it on. Okay, so I saw somebody asking, shoot, they went by so fast. I saw another question about, oh, I don't know what it's about. Oh, yeah, what if it's, as soon as you realize you haven't fed it. Or sorry, feed it. I think that's what the question was. If you forget to feed it, just feed it as soon as you remember. And I saw a question, 50 grams. 50 grams flour, 50 grams water. Use 25 grams white, 25 grams whole wheat, but 50 total. I rarely clean my Bun Mama jars. They don't get moldy. So I cleaned one today because I needed a clean one for this class. So yeah, I mean, I'll keep my starter in my jar for months and months, like 6 months, 9 months. And yeah, it's fun. If you don't like, I don't know, if it grosses you out, you can clean it. Soak it though. If you soak it first, it's easier because the stuff's like glue. I posted about wheat paste today, which is glue, and it's water and flour. So soak the jar before you wash it.
Okay, Anne-Marie, it's 2 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you all for showing up to this sourdough starter class.
Much for coming and for all of your questions. Everybody always has such great questions.
Yeah, if you guys interested to learn more about sourdough bread baking, please sign up to Anne-Marie's class. You can sign up in Anne-Marie's website, right, Anne-Marie?
Yep. ZeroWasteChef.com.
All right. Thank you all.
Well, thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday or Monday morning.
Bye.
Bye.